Let me turn this light on. There you go. Hello everyone, welcome back. It is the 4th of July and I gotta get some videos done. So I'm gonna get a couple done today. In case anyone was curious, the little update is my sister's trying to take me back to court. She wants money from the house that she never contributed to. She just wants a bunch of stuff. So more than likely I'll lose the house, and you know, that's fine. You just get tired of somebody who thinks that they're owed everything and they've never contributed. It's one of those. Everybody knows one of those people. They're just worthless. So before we get started, that was just my little quick rant. Before we get started, there's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. You could subscribe if you'd like to. And my nose keeps itching. And give me a thumbs up. That helps. All right, let's get on to the video.
Aren't really the interpretations that they would have had for their first readers. Yes. Is there someone over here? Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk just a little bit more about the relationship between these textual variants and different interpretations of the manuscripts with the actual process of canonization, or deciding what should be put into the Christian canon and what should be omitted?
The relationship between the changes in the manuscripts and what should go in and what should go out.
Yeah, where they're like, you know, did that play into the debates of, you know, this gospel should be left out because we have different copies that are saying different things, for instance?
Yeah, actually, you know, that particular issue didn't come up very much about.
That would be difficult because you would have to have a lot of different people spotting differences and then wanting to come together, but they would have to be people in a position to be able to add or subtract, unless they were just going to create their whole new Bible. But again, you would have to have some kind of, not authority, but some kind of position of power that if you put this Bible out, people would accept it. And again, you are also then making changes to that Bible. Yeah, this is a weird thing.
You know, can this be in because this manuscript has been changed in so many ways? There are interesting questions about the relationship of text and canon, though. I mean, just on kind of the most basic level, if the woman taken in adultery isn't in the oldest manuscripts, but it's in most of the manuscripts from the Middle Ages, is it part of the Bible or not? You know, is it part of the canon? Or the last 12 verses of Mark. They're not in the earliest manuscripts of Mark, but they're in most of the manuscripts of Mark. So is it part of the Bible or not? And that really is a good question. And it's not a question that a historian can answer. It's a question that a theologian needs to answer. Because it has to do not with historical fact, but with theological interpretation about the nature of Scripture. But it's really, I think it's a fundamental question for theologians, because if theology... If a biblical theology is rooted in the text, you have to know what the text is. Which is, for me, one of the reasons I've been surprised over the years that theologians show no interest in textual criticism at all, most of them. No knowledge of it, no interest in it. And it seems to me it's actually kind of important for biblical theologians anyway. So, I think you need to go to the mic if you have a question. Did you have a question here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for talk. I have a question regarding the discrepancy among the Gospels.
Yes.
There are many differences, and then it sounds like it's almost embarrassing to have those 4 Gospels put together as a Bible and say that, you know, this is truth, because there are obvious differences.
Yes.
Then my point is there are argument that if there are embarrassing discrepancies among the Bible, in the Bible, why would early Christians and why would they put them together and they say it's the Bible, although there are obvious differences?
Yes, it's a great question. Why did the early Christians not look at these discrepancies and say this is a problem? Why did they include them in the same, in the same covers as the Bible? It's a really good question, and I think that actually different early Christians had different answers to that. One early Christian in the second century was a guy named Tatian, whose answer to this was that you've got these four accounts, and this guy Tatian actually produced a Life of Christ in stereo for Syriac reading Christians in the second century. He took the four Gospels and he put them together into one big gospel, and reconciled them all together with one another in a book that was called the Diatessaron, which means through the four. Now you take the four, and through the four you get the big gospel. So that was one way of dealing with the problem. Some Christian authors thought that if you have contradictions between these texts, then what that is the Holy Spirit telling you that you need to look for the deeper meaning of the text, because the surface meaning of the text obviously doesn't work. And so it's God telling you need to look for the deeper meaning of the text. And the reality is that most Christians in the second, third centuries down to today never realized that there are differences. I mean, most people read the Bible and don't realize that there are differences. And I think it was that way in the early church too. In fact, most of these people couldn't read anyway. So, I mean, it wasn't that they could do a careful analysis of the synoptic gospels. They couldn't read the gospel. So they heard them read in church, and they'd hear a story one week, and then another story next week, another story the next week. And it didn't occur to them that there are discrepancies. And
so when I was growing up, I've heard about discrepancies. But I was always told that, how was it phrased to me? I'm trying to phrase it two people could see the same incident but perceive it or retell it or recall it mentally in memory different. Someone might have exaggerated, an action, like the person running, while somebody else might give a speech or something that was said, make it stronger or make it, it's like I'm a stuttering fool. It's like an eyewitness to a crime. Eyewitnesses are terrible. We all are, as human beings. We're all flawed in how we remember things, because in traumatic situations or whatever, there could be five of us. We could witness something. We could all turn around and tell someone what we saw, and it would be slightly different from everyone, because our perception of how we recall things are going to be different. Whether that is the color of a shirt or a hat, beard, whether it's a full beard, it's a little bit less. Like, everyone's recollection is different, and of course, it's also going to change because your ability to recall that memory dissipates over time. So that's what I was always told. It's not going to be the same because it's different people recall things differently. And that always made sense to me. But I never understood that it was really big leaps and bounds and changes. And when you have people adding things and subtracting things, now you've gotten a wash as to, well, what really was it? How did things change so much? I don't know anyone out there ever played the kids game Telephone. If you don't know what it is, you have a bunch of kids that sit in a circle. One person, an adult, leans in and says something to one of the kids. The shirt is blue and the fire hydrant says hi. Something goofy. That kid then turns around and whispers it to the next kid, and it goes right on down along the line, and it comes back, and the original kid, he then tells what he heard to the group. And it's amazing to see how it's changed over time, because you may have misheard something. The boy's wearing a blue shirt and the fire hydrant says hello. Well, now it's the boy in the blue shirt talked to the fire hydrant and said hello. And maybe that's how it comes back to you. It's not how it's close, but it's not what it was. I apologize for this rant. But you understand that one person talking to another person, talking to another person, talking to another person, you can get a completely different subject so to speak. Apologize. But yeah, that's how it was always explained to me. And then I would always look at that, well, if that's possible, then why wouldn't it be possible to have changed a lot more? We just don't know it, you know?
So this idea of kind of finding these discrepancies in a way really wasn't the issue for most of these early Christians, I think.
One more question. Can you give the reference to what just claimed about the illiteracy in the early Christianity and
Yes, the illiteracy
My coffee's cold.
of early Christianity.
just give me you can just give me references.
Yeah. The best study of literacy in the ancient world is William Harris, and it's simply called Ancient Literacy, published by Harvard University Press. He doesn't deal very much with Christianity, but he does say a few things about it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I've come across a couple of radical pieces of information on the Bible I wonder if you'd comment on. One is that, I've read this in several places from biblical historians. One is that there was a get-together called the Second Council of Constantinople in around 555 AD. And it was one where they did some major deletions in the Bible, and they took out just about everything Jesus said about reincarnation. That's one of them.
Well, that one's easy. That's false.
Okay. One of the places I
was gonna say that's new to me, but then again, it wouldn't be shocking because there's a lot of stuff I don't know.
read this in a book called A Jesus Mystery by Janet Bach. I don't know if that means anything to you.
Right. Don't read those books.
Okay. Okay, and all due
I got my information from the Da Vinci Code. It's got to be accurate, right?
respect, how are they wrong and you're right?
Authority.
That's it?
I mean, there are responsible historians, and there are people who are not responsible historians, and it's a very good question actually, because how do you know the difference? You go to a bookstore and you've got these books. I mean, you know, and some have nice covers and some don't have nice cover. How do you know who? And it's actually not an easy thing, and you have to know who to trust. And so one thing to do is look at credentials. Where do these?
There's a book I read. I won't give. It was about Andrew Jackson. I won't give the name of the author because I do like the author. I'm going to cough for a second. Sorry. What was I talking about? Oh, there's a. It's about Andrew Jackson. I'm not going to mention the book, and I won't mention the author. Andrew Jackson, people who don't know, 7th president of the United States. So, the book about him, by a very, very well-known author who writes historical stuff, talks about the life of Andrew Jackson. And it was one of the first books I ever read on the subject, on Jackson. And I was blown away at some of the things that I'd read. And I was like, wow, man, wow, oh my goodness, wow, 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 wow. Then that intrigued me. So I started reading more books. And then I visited his home and toured the home and talked to the tour guides and visited the grave and all that. It made me want to do all that. And I found out that the author had put their own opinion in certain things where we don't exactly know what happened to Jackson's mom. We don't know where she's buried. This. And this person put their own flair into it and made it more dramatic in terms of what happened to Jackson's mother. One of the incidents of a duel and this and that, and really kind of took what would be the phrase artistic, not leeway, artistic, basically in certain aspects they went ahead and put their own thing. Maybe it was, this fits the story narrative better because it's more gut-wrenching, it's more painful to read, and it makes you understand this person more. And I found out that I was reading that I had read something that had happened to him, supposedly, and no one else has ever said that was true. And I want to believe it because it does make the story more powerful and more heartbreaking. But then I realized I can't believe in that because it's just not true. And so it makes me question other books that I've read from this author, which I've read a few. It makes me now, and I have a couple on my bookshelf that I see. One, his name pops out, one book in particular. But it makes me question if I read that book, am I honestly getting the true story? And that's upsetting because if you're going to question the author, who is a historian, then you have to start questioning everything. Just pointing that out.
People teach. Do they teach? Where did they get their degrees? Do they have degrees? Or are they independent researchers? An independent researcher is somebody who doesn't have a degree usually. Why don't they have a degree? So they might be telling the truth, but where do they get their information from? Look at their footnotes and see if they tell you where they got their information from. And then read scholars who teach in reputable institutions, who have reputable degrees, and who whose books go through the kind of vetting process that is typical in scholarship. Which is that you can't, anybody can publish a book today, but scholarly presses publish books that have gone through a scholarly process of evaluation, and that's the kind of book you want to read if you want.
Just as a side note, I'm actually publishing a book of my own. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but it's about Jesus and the 4.5 years that he was in professional baseball. It's got to be true. You can't lie. I am a historian, untrained. No college for that. And so you have to, it's got to be truthful. You can't lie on YouTube, basically, is what I'm saying.
An authoritative account.
Okay. Yeah, and the second piece of information was that there's 18 years that are missing from the Bible, basically from the age of 12 to the age of 30. And it's been said that that was deleted, and that he spent those years traveling through India and visiting with various holy men and so forth,
right,
and reaching a state of enlightenment,
right,
and then coming back to.
Yeah, that, you can even find gospels that claim that. These gospels were written in the 19th century, but you can at least find gospels that say it. There are 18 years that are unaccounted for. And the question is, what would Jesus have been doing during these 18 years? And what most historians think is that he would have been doing what any Jewish lad in a small hamlet in Galilee would have been doing. He would have been working every day. He's probably a carpenter, or apprenticed as a carpenter, and he probably didn't travel. Jews. He was very poor. Probably a hand-to-mouth existence, and probably worked 6 days a week, and on the seventh day you couldn't go anywhere because it was the Sabbath. So my guess is he just grew up in Nazareth, and there are no ancient sources. You asked me how do I know this? I've read all of the ancient sources. There are no ancient sources that say anything about Jesus going to India.
Yeah, I just find, given the stature of this man, that the fact that there was zero written about him in those 18 years is very suspicious to me. I just think there must have been a deletion somewhere. Why didn't somewhere in the Bible it said, well, from the age of 12 he just spent the time with his father in his shop and doing this and that, and then all of a sudden emerged at 30 and did all these miraculous things. So, anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
My question concerns essentially languages.
Real quick, that guy was saying, why didn't they say from the age of 12 to 30 he was working with his father in a shop and blah, blah, blah? Because we don't know that. We can't. The whole thing is about misquoting or changing things in the Bible, correct? Well, we can't put that in because we don't know if that's true. So you're basically wanting to add to any misrepresentation by saying, well, why don't we just do this? Well, that's what the other people said. Why don't we just change this to make this? Why don't we fix this so that it makes this look better? You're adding to the problem, sir. What are you saying?
I understand correctly, and I'm not a biblical scholar, but I've done a little bit of work. Most of what is written is from 30 years, the earliest would be some of the earlier letters of Paul, to 60 and further on years later, after Christ passed on, much of which is either in Greek or in Latin. And in spite of what the governor of Texas was purported to have said in about 1923 in a trial on bilingual languages, they had that same problem when she threw a Bible down and said, if English was good enough for Jesus, then it's good enough for our students. I suspect that Jesus didn't speak English and actually spoke the language of the common people, since he was actually trying to talk to the common people, which, if I understand correctly, in first century Palestine was Aramaic. And there are very few Aramaic texts around. So could you comment on what's missing between what was actually said and the codices that we're actually trying to decode, with no reference to Da Vinci Code here?
Jesus spoke English, huh? I bet he also said, life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Yeah. So Forrest Gump, the movie, is based off the life of Jesus. Is that what we're saying? I'm joking on that one. Yeah, he spoke English. Okay. We have no proof that he spoke English, but let's just say he did. But what if? Yeah, I know. What if? What if he also spoke Chinese? Come on. Let's get serious here.
Decode as being what he...
By the way, if anyone knows if Jesus did speak Chinese, that would be amazing, because then I look like a fool, which I do anyways, but whatever.
He might have said.
Yes.
In fact, I don't believe he spoke English, so he did not say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. No. And in fact, I think the Neil Douglas Klotz and a bunch of others in this Aramaic movement are trying to do something along these lines. So could you comment on that and where you stand there?
Yeah, so, no, it's absolutely right. Jesus spoke Aramaic. My opinion is that he did not know Greek, and that he did not know Latin. I think he probably knew Aramaic. The Gospels are written in Greek, so already when you're reading the Gospels in Greek, you're...
I'm sorry for pausing so much. Is Aramaic what is considered now the dead language? Like, no one speaks Aramaic? Okay, so we have people who speak Aramaic, but as a whole civilization, there isn't any particular group that speaks Aramaic. Am I wrong on that, or am I thinking of a different language? I mean, it doesn't really matter, but just asking for a friend.
Step removed from the words of Jesus, assuming that the words that are being recorded are actually words that he said, because they're written 30 or 40 years later, and maybe some of these words weren't things that he actually said. There are sayings in the Gospels that make better sense if you retranslate them into Aramaic from Greek. I mean, it's tricky to do. I mean, but it's fun too. So so give you an example. There's a saying that doesn't make very good sense in Mark chapter 2. I'll use the sexist phrasing of this because it's the one people are familiar with, and it's one that it's easier to make my point. Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? Sounds like familiar. But it doesn't make any sense. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. What's the therefore? Because it doesn't work. Well, but if you say it in Aramaic, the word for man, meaning human being, and the word for Son of Man is the same word, Barnashah. Sabbath was made for Barnashah, not Barnashah for the Sabbath. Therefore, Barnashah is Lord of the Sabbath. That makes sense. So you retrovert it into Aramaic, and it adds up. And there are other sayings, just as a side, so you need to do that actually if you're doing the historical Jesus study. The other side of that is there are some things that cannot be retroverted back into Aramaic, which means Jesus probably didn't say them. Give you a famous example. Every World Series behind home plate, you get somebody holding up a sign, John 3:3. You must be born again. This is a very interesting passage that people holding these signs don't realize, the linguistic problems, which is this. When Jesus says this in the Gospel of John, he says, a person must be born anothen to see the kingdom of heaven. Anothen is a Greek word. Now, the word anothen is interesting because it actually has two meanings. It can mean from above, or it can mean a second time. Okay, it means both things. And you have to decide which it means depending on the context. Nicodemus misunderstands what Jesus says. Jesus is saying you have to be born from heaven, to see the kingdom of heaven. And Nicodemus thinks, I've got to go crawl back into my mother's womb and be born a second time? And then Jesus corrects his mistake. No. And he tells him what he meant the first time. So the conversation hinges on the double entendre of this word anothen, the Greek word anothen. And you cannot reproduce the double entendre in Aramaic. So the conversation hinges on a particular Greek word that doesn't have a parallel in Aramaic, which means the conversation couldn't have happened like that. So,
How about Hebrew?
no Hebrew either. Yeah. But they weren't speaking Hebrew in Jesus' day. Jesus probably could read Hebrew, I think, but they weren't. It wasn't a spoken language in Palestine in his time. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one is, how would you compare the copyists of the Sophorim copyists with those of the early Christians, which you've made a great point on?
You're asking about
copyists of Ezra's
Jewish scribes from the Middle Ages. You're asking about?
No, those are Masoretes. I'm talking about the copyists in Ezra's time.
Yeah. We don't know. I don't think we know. What a lot of people say when I give a talk on this about the New Testament is they point out that what they say is, well, Jewish practices were to copy everything meticulously, exactly, and they're usually thinking about the Masoretes. In the Middle Ages, there were Jewish practices that were extremely meticulous, but I don't think we know very much about copying practices in antiquity, especially in the Persian period, because we just don't have the kind of evidence we need.
Thank you. The second question was, may I have your autograph?
Yes, you may. I'm going to take one more question because this fellow, and then I'm going to stop.
Yes. In some of the ancient cultures, there were oral traditions that seemed to be designed to preserve a certain passages orally very exactly. Is there any evidence from early Christian times that there, in some corner of Christendom, such traditions were there, and what would they say about the passages?
Yes, were oral traditions such that the traditions were being kept intact over the years with the retelling. And there have been New Testament scholars who've argued that Jesus was a rabbi who taught his disciples certain things, and they memorized these things so they passed them along without changing them orally. That idea has run into trouble on two grounds. One is that there have been anthropological studies of oral societies that have shown that in most oral cultures it actually doesn't work the way we would think it would work. Well, the way we think it would work is that if you can't write something down, that you'd probably want to remember it exactly because you don't have a way of writing it down, so you'd want to remember it exactly. But that idea that you would want to remember it exactly, in fact, is a product of written cultures. In oral societies, that isn't how they think, because they think, most people in oral cultures know that in an oral presentation, you change the story depending on the audience, the situation, the need at hand, etc., etc. So there's that. The other thing is that there's a way to check whether the stories about Jesus were being passed along without changing or being changed orally, and that's the fact that we have several different authors who have written down the things Jesus allegedly said and did, and you can compare them with one another. And when you do that, there are discrepancies. So it looks like people are changing the stories both orally and at the written stage, I think. Okay, I need to stop there. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed being with you.
Okay. That was good. Can I get your autograph? He doesn't seem like a guy who probably is used to that, so he was just like, yeah, okay, I'm going to move on now. He's probably going to sneak out so he doesn't have to sign anything. Okay, this is good. I like this. This was, again, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I'm sorry, I apologize. This was sponsored by Mohamed. This is Misquoting Jesus in the Bible, Professor Bart D. Ehrman. Apologize. I got on a rant before I started the video, so I did not get to say that. My apologies to Mohamed Ismail. Even though it sounds like Ishmael, and he did say that's what it is, but I feel like I should say Ismail with no H, because that's how it's spelled. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, we're going to end this here. I do appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.